Take notes, man, listen. First of all, the foundation. Money is the root of all evil. The cream will have you shitting on your people.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to yet another college football video. This time we got the second part to the most disappointing team series. So much has happened in college football. I'm going to make another transfer portal madness type of video, just recapping all the shit that took place. Um, but I'm not going to get too out of topic for this video. We're going to simply stick with this video and let's get right into it. Starting off, we have a team that personally let me down massively this season, and that is Penn State. Penn State had so much hype going into the season, which I bought into. I'm not here to pretend that I was a doubter of Penn State. I believed in Penn State so much so I said they were going to beat Ohio State, and I even had them higher than Alabama to start the season. So I was in the top percent of people that were drinking the Penn State Kool-Aid, and they let me down massively. Getting into the stats of it, this is compared to last year to this year. And keep in mind, guys, last year Penn State was like they were bad offensively. Bad for Penn State. Like, obviously, if you gave Iowa these offensive numbers, they'd love it, right? But Penn State is a team that we view as a consistent top 10 to 12 program and should be, at least in most people's minds, contending every year. So last year, people did not think the offense was good enough, and I think they were correct. I don't think the offense was dynamic enough last season. They had a great duo of running backs, but they could not capitalize off play action. They couldn't move the ball downfield through the air, and it just wasn't good for the passing game all around. And the defense last season, it was very, very good. You could argue it was top 12 to 15 in the whole country. But this season, man, let's start with the defense, man. The most sacks in the entire country, 3.77 sacks per game, 24 takeaways, tied for 12th in the country, 13.4 points per game, third best in the whole country, 75 rushing yards allowed. That's best in the whole country, better than Georgia, who was number one last year at around 80 something yards a game. Seventh in passing yards allowed, second in total yards allowed. This was the best defense in the country. You will not find another defense who is top four or is top three in four categories, number one in multiple categories, and top 12 in the other two categories. It's like they were damn near legendary on the defensive side of the ball this season. And what did they have on the offensive side to pair along with that? The 78th best passing offense in the country. And look, there was a lot of talk about Drew Aller coming in and making this a dangerous passing game. And I bought into that. If you would have told Penn State fans that Drew Aller would come in and their passing game would put up almost 40 less yards a game than it did last year with Sean Clifford, they might have just keeled over and died right there because it would have been a rough season ahead of them. They somehow managed to run for slightly more yards than they did last season. Again, a great duo of running backs. Points per game is pretty damn similar. Less sacks allowed because they threw it less. They did turn the ball over significantly less. They only turned it over 8 times the entire year, which is impressive. But under 400 yards per game, which is the middle of the pack. I mean, and this is the thing, when you have the best offense or the best defense, sorry, in the country to go along with this, the defense gives you 24 takeaways. You should have, I mean, it's such a help to the offense. Think about the amount of times Penn State got the ball. Their starting field positions, their own 40, their own 45, their own 50, starting in their opponent's territory due to a takeaway. This is all the things Penn State's offense had going in their favor, and they still just couldn't get anything going all year. Every time they had a big game, they completely fell apart. Looking at their players from last season compared to this season, the quarterback comparison I think is the most just sad. Sean Clifford, Penn State fans hate him. By the end of Sean Clifford's career, Penn State fans honestly could not wait for him to leave. They were distraught having Sean Clifford at quarterback. And who would have thought it would get worse? Drew Aller would have less yards, 5% less completion percentage. He only threw 2 picks, but I mean, he didn't throw many yards or touchdowns against good teams whatsoever. Nick Singleton and Katron Allen both back-to-back good years. Obviously, those are the two constants on this offense. The only problem with Nick Singleton is his yards per carry went down massively. 2.5 yards per carry is absurd for a running back. Thankfully for him, he almost damn near 7 a game last season because, I mean, for anybody else in the country, you take away 2.5 yards per carry, they're done for. But Singleton still managed to have over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns from scrimmage. Um, the biggest problem for this Penn State offense, besides just subpar quarterback play, would be they have not had a number one receiver and even a number two receiver, to be quite honest with you. Last season it was Parker Washington, obviously 600 yards. It's just not going to do it. This year was Keandre Lambert Smith, who started off on fire, and I thought he could be that number one type of guy, but he just didn't pan out. By the end of the year, finished a little under 700 yards and only 12.7 yards per catch. It's just not enough. You're not going to beat a Michigan, an Ohio State, an Ole Miss, teams like this. You can't beat them if you don't have a vertical threat who can stretch the field, who can create explosive plays and run after catch. Penn State didn't have anybody like that. And they got a guy in Dante Cephas out of the transfer portal last summer. I'm like, oh, this is going to be the guy. Here he is on a platter. And they couldn't get him involved all season. And by the end of the year, he wasn't even a factor for them. So just a missed opportunity in the fact that they knew what their weaknesses were. They knew they had their running game returning. They had their defense returning. They knew they had to find a way to stretch the ball downfield, and they couldn't do it, which is just a a shame on the coaching staff, and they did a disservice to all their stars defensively, to these two running backs, to a guy like Ola Fashanu, who decided to stay even though he could have been a top 15 pick last season. He decided to come back to Penn State. And for what is the question I have. Here are some of their defensive guys who came back and just balled out this season. Abdul Carter, Adissa Isaac, Kalen King, Johnny Dixon. I mean, it was a special unit out there on the Penn State defense, and they got nothing to show for it. They played three top 10 opponents, and you lost all 10 of them. Or sorry, you lost to all three of them. Um, and by the end, against Ole Miss, it wasn't even close. And it was an embarrassing season for Penn State. Let's break down here. Let's go game by game and where I honestly was. So after the first where I mean, you could just look at the first 6 games as a whole, right? They don't play any team of note. They played Iowa, and that at that game, I was like, okay, I want to see how Drew Aller looks against this Iowa defense, and he looked fine. I think he threw like 4 touchdowns, but only like 100 something yards. But he didn't need to because obviously Iowa's not putting up a goddamn point against this Penn State defense. They had multiple shutouts in their first 6 games, and coming off the domination of UMass, I came in thinking like, oh man, do they have a chance? Could they possibly beat an Ohio State? I thought they could. I thought they could. And if you watch the game, they easily could have. Their defense played well enough. If you hold Ohio, keep in mind, this was in Ohio State, guys. If you go to Ohio State and you hold them to 20 points, you have to win that game. Their defense did their job, but Penn State's offense was abysmal. It was laughably bad. It wasn't even close. They scored a garbage time touchdown, and besides that, they might as well not even have showed up. Drew Aller was useless. They couldn't establish the run game. Receivers got no separation. Like they didn't do anything right on offense. Like it was a joke. And I hope I don't just sound angry for the sake of hating on Penn State. This is a team who had all the talent, had all the time in the world. You had 6 games before you played a top opponent. You had 6 games of preparation. Okay. Alabama played Texas week 2. Like Ohio State played Notre Dame like week 4, whatever it was. You had 6 games to get ready for the Ohio State game. Your defense showed up. They did their job, and you can't put up 20 goddamn points. with all the extra possessions your defense gave, with all the short field, your defense, you can't put up 20 points. It's just a joke. And at that point, honestly, I hopped off the bandwagon. I really didn't think there was any hope they were beating Michigan after that game. And you look, they struggled against Indiana. It was closer than 9 points. Penn State pulled away late, but they struggled against Indiana. Maryland was not a good team. Penn State beat them handedly. And the Michigan game, really, it's the same story. If you hold Michigan at 24 points at home, you got to win that game. They held Michigan to like 80 passing yards. Obviously, Michigan, they did very well in the run game. Blake Corum had a big game, but your defense in the two biggest games of your season holds your two biggest rivals to 20 and 24 respectively, and you can't beat either of them because your offense is just that much of a joke. Because it is. Drew Waller is a fraud. He did nothing in those two games. Honestly, no receiver got any separation. Offensive line couldn't block. Running backs didn't make explosive plays. Nothing positive to speak about in 2 hours of play offensively against Ohio State and Michigan. You squeak out a win against Rutgers. You beat god awful Michigan State, and for some reason, they're still a top 10 ranked team. After the Michigan game, I don't think I had them in my top 15 for the rest of the season because they didn't deserve to be. Their offense, it was pretty clear. You play a Michigan State, you play a Maryland, you play a Northwestern, you play a UMass, you play a Delaware, yeah, you can put up 40 plus points. Mainly because your defense gets at least 3 or 4 takeaways every game. But you play a good team, and it's physicality against physicality. Your offense has to step up. They shit the bed. It's not even competitive most of the time when you're watching it. Penn State can't even pick up a goddamn first down for most of the game against Ohio State and Michigan. It's a joke. It's a joke. And I know I'm not really providing much analysis here, but it's the same story. They they don't run a sophisticated enough offense because they're not talented enough on offense to pick up third downs against good teams. And look, I'll give you this. I'll give you this. Ohio State and Michigan, respectively, are both top 5 defenses in the country. Michigan probably a top 3 defense. Ohio State probably a top 4 or 5 defense. Most teams struggled against those defenses, right? But if your defense is doing their job, the offense has to show up too. That's how I feel about that. And then the bowl game against Ole Miss, it wasn't close. Ole Miss dominated. Um, and Penn State got embarrassed. I mean, that's their season. That's their season. Penn State started off on fire, 6-0, and then they lose 3 out of their last 7, all against top 10 teams, and Penn State is left wondering, do they even bring back their coach? I don't think James Franklin is good enough to win anything. Maybe with a 12-team playoff, you say, well, we don't have to beat Ohio State and Michigan every year. Hopefully, we just lose to one of them and we sneak into the playoff, and hopefully, other teams beat Ohio State and Michigan, so we don't have to. Maybe if that's how you want to try and win, but I don't. I honestly just have no faith in James Franklin as long as he's there. I don't think he's good enough. I don't think this offense is good enough. I don't think Drew Aller is good enough. I don't think they have enough weapons. It's a bad time to be a Penn State fan, honestly. Moving on to another Big Ten team, we have Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a team that underwent a lot of change last summer, bringing in a new head coach, Luke Fickell from Cincinnati, bringing in a new offensive coordinator, Phil Longo from North Carolina, a big part of why Drake May had a monster season the previous year, and bringing in a new quarterback, Tanner Mordecai, who himself put together a monster statistical season at SMU. So a lot of change, a lot of optimism from Wisconsin fans hoping for more dynamic and diverse passing attack, hopefully, or hopeful that it could complement their already established run game and they could easily win the Big Ten West. That was the hope, at least. Did it come to fruition? Absolutely not. Wisconsin was awful. 7-6, and let's break it down here. Last season, you can see Wisconsin 91st best offense, 114th best passing offense. It's abysmal. It's not good enough at any level, let alone the Big Ten. 26 points per game, again, embarrassing. Change needed to happen, so I was not mad at the coaching change. 18 turnovers too much, but defensively, Wisconsin, keep in mind the poor offense that they were putting together. Their defense was actually very good last season. I'd argue it was top 10 in the country. 20 plus takeaways, only 100 rushing yards allowed per game. They had a lot to overcome offensively, and I think they still got the job done defensively. Held teams to 20 and a half or less points per game. Let's look at the adjustment now. Last season of the season, well, you say, okay, they averaged 20 more yards per game of total offense. They averaged 40 more yards of passing offense per game. They ran the ball less, which is to be expected. They scored even less, though, which is just shocking. I mean, you're Wisconsin. You're a Power Five team. You're a Big Ten team. You're one of the 4 or 5 best just programs in the Big Ten. You averaged 26 points per game one season. You follow that up with an offensive-minded head coach making offensive-friendly changes to the program, and you averaged 3 less points than you did the year before. 23 and a half is abysmal. I'm kind of in shock just looking at that. I put the video. I knew this ahead of time, but it's like defensively, they lost a couple players to the NFL, mainly Nick Herbig, Keanu Benton, guys like that. But they averaged even less points per game allowed on defense. Like, this defense, they fought. I'll give them that. Top 40 in total yards, passing yards, and rushing yards. Nothing, spectacular on the defense, but I think the defense played hard. They did their job most of the time. You'll see when we get into some of these games, the defense is not to blame whatsoever. Um, let's get into the offensive players here. Comparison. Graham Mertz was bad last season. There's no getting around that. He was handicapping this team in their potential through the air. With that being said, Tanner Mordecai, when he was not hurt, because he did miss time, when he was out there, he wasn't good enough. That's what it is. I think if he would have played the whole season, the numbers would have looked a little better, but it's not like when he was out there, he was lighting the world on fire. It just wasn't good enough. Um, Braylon Allen was their star last season. People were thinking he could have left the transfer portal. He decided to return. He probably should have left. Loyalty was not the best call here for Braylon Allen. His stats took a dip, but again, he's still a talented player. I think he declared for the NFL draft. He will be gone in the first or the second day of the draft, I believe. Ches Malusi was a guy who was a contributor last season, a role player, not the same guy this season. His touches were cut in half. And as far as number one receiver, last season they had a guy named Shamiri Dyke, had over 700 yards, 7 touchdowns. This season it was Will Pauling, 75 catches. Honestly, pretty impressive numbers considering he had multiple quarterbacks who neither of which was playing particularly well. So Will Pauling, I think, was a shining light in a very lackluster receiving core at Wisconsin. But again, outside of Braylon Allen, who can you point to on this entire offense where you say we need a big play. We're going to get the ball to this guy. I don't think there was one on this team. And then defensively, you look at last season, losing, like I said, Nick Herbig, who was just a monster, a pass rush phenom, and Keanu Benton. Um, Ricardo Hallman had a monster season. 7 interceptions by his damn self is ridiculous. Hunter Waller, 120 tackles. They had some good players. Mima, not going to say his last name, he returned, had a big year. I don't think the defense was bad at all. If you look, that 20 point per game number is damn solid. A lot of teams, a lot of good defenses hold teams to about 20 points per game, and Wisconsin's no different. I think the defense did their job, but obviously the story is the offense, the changes that were promised not coming to fruition. Looking at their season game by game, we can see that it was a quick loss to Washington State, and I'll give Washington State credit here. Early on in the season, they were operating at a very high level offensively. So you could point to that game and say, okay, they gave up 31 points to Washington State. They were on the road, I believe. So maybe that's an understandable loss. But you come out right away, you beat Buffalo, you beat Georgia Southern, you beat Purdue, and look at this here. 3 of their first 4 games, right? They put up at least 35 points, and their defense holds their opponents to under 20 points per game. That's a great start for Wisconsin, honestly. And I know they didn't get back ranked after the loss to Washington State, but I thought those first 4 weeks they were playing well. And then they beat Rutgers, who in hindsight ended up being a not bad team, especially for Rutgers standards. So a double-digit win over Rutgers is not too bad in hindsight. Then they lose to Iowa, which is, I guess, where their season really just went downhill because that was kind of eliminating Wisconsin from the Big Ten West picture. Illinois, you beat them by 4. They were not good. Then you lose to Ohio State. Keep in mind, you only hold Ohio State to 24 points. I know I said the same thing about Penn State, but I mean, Ohio State's defense was just that good, I guess. I guess you're not scoring more than around 10 points against them. The Indiana loss hurts because Indiana had a horrible year, and you only put up 14 points against Indiana. That's not great. The Northwestern loss, again, Northwestern hindsight, similar to Rutgers, not as bad as people were expecting. Northwestern was actually pretty solid, ended up beating Utah in their bowl game. But again, a 14-point loss to Northwestern, unacceptable. A good win against Nebraska, double-digit win against Minnesota. But at this point, the season's over, right? You have a 3-game skid there after you beat Illinois. And if they would have beat Indiana and Northwestern, which I think they're certainly capable of, then obviously we're talking about this season very differently. But you look at this 3-game stretch here. They put up 10, 14, and 10. They did not score 30 points until their bowl game after the Purdue game. They went more than 2 months without scoring 30. And this is a team that scored 30 in 3 out of their first 4 games. So the offense fell off a cliff and stayed there for a while, which is it had to be just crushing for Wisconsin fans. And I mean, they got a bit of the Iowa experience for a while, really. And I don't know why. I don't know who thought it was a good idea to put them against LSU in their bowl matchup, but they scored 30 plus against LSU. But their defense got torched and they end up losing that game. So you finish the season 7-6. And where do you go from here? Well, I have to assume Tanner Mordecai is not coming back. Who's the answer at quarterback? I'm sure they probably got somebody in the transfer portal that I'm not aware of yet, but they need a new healthy option at quarterback, and they got to figure things out quickly because if they put up another 6 or 7 win season, I have to think that they're already looking for a change at head coach and certainly coordinator because the Phil Longo revolutionizing the passing game at Wisconsin has failed so far in 1 year. They're going to lose Braylon Allen, so what's the identity of this offense moving forward? I have no clue. Again, if you're on the most disappointing teams video, then the outlook is not very bright especially for Wisconsin. It's just a lot of uncertainty and not a lot of positives to hang your hat on for Wisconsin. So it sucks I have to put it like that, but it is what it is. That is going to be it for this video, y'all. Leave a like if you enjoyed. I'll be back pretty soon with another video, not talking about a similar thing specifically, but you'll see what I mean. It'll be out in a few days. But leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, comment. Who did you think some of the most disappointing teams were? Do you think there's any goddamn hope for Penn State or Wisconsin? I don't. But let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
It's out the motherfucking pack. Right out the niggas don't know how to act.